And yeah. You didn't? No, I appreciate it. Putting it on a religious building is some brass tacks. Support candidates now. Right.
Sorry, I think we're just about to get started. With or without it?
Yeah. Let's go.
Are you ready?
Let's go. Wait enough. We're going. Yeah, we're rolling. They do not support you. Here, I never realized. Oh, she's got it.
Thank you. I just came back from work from Fremont Elementary School, and wow, I feel like I'm back at work.
Is that why?
Is it me? Hi, everyone. Hi. It's always me.
All right, this is much better. All right.
No, maybe not.
I don't need a mic. I can project. Just press and hold on. Still have feedback. Okay, much better.
Yes.
All right.
Oh yeah, train lights.
Hello. Okay. Setting up the microphone. All right. Welcome to the People's Forums, everybody. This is the first time ever. Thank you for everyone who's watching at home from the live stream and who showed up in person.
Wow, cursed.
Thank you for whoever showed up in person. We really appreciate it. This event is sponsored by Glendale Out and GUSC Parents. We also want to thank the organizations and individuals in the community who submitted their questions for today's People's Forum. So, judging by the amount of council candidates that have arrived today for the forum, we're deciding to do something a bit more informal, a little more relaxed, on more of the side of dialogue. So instead of having each council candidate be given 90 seconds to give an answer on a question individually, we're going to just throw the question into the pond. We're going to see how everyone responds back. So our mindset here is really to make sure how council candidates can work amongst each other to create a policy decision together to help make Glendale better. That's really what we're here for. All right. So we're going to introduce our council candidates now. If you want to introduce yourself, starting from my left.
I am Dan Robin. I'm your current council member since 2020.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Asatrian. I am your council member since 2022. It's not working.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Alec Bertress of Let's Build Community.
All right, this is working wonderful. All right, so our first question is from the Glendale Community Pantry. Their work is focusing on providing food and vital supplies for our community through mutual aid. They are part of the Los Angeles Community Fridges Network. So their question is, the House Resolution 1, a law, has caused cuts to the federal funding that helps pay for CalFresh, and now some previously qualified CalFresh recipients will get less money for food. Others will be removed from the program entirely due to the additions of new restrictions. Many lawfully present immigrants will no longer qualify for CalFresh. With food costs also rising, do you have any specific plan or ideas for how to remediate these impacts on our vulnerable community members' access to food? And so as mentioned previously, this is more of a roundtable discussion, so feel free to work off each other's answers, have kind of a debate amongst what the best policy solution will be. Again, the question is largely around how we remediate the impacts of federal funding
start. I'll say that this isn't just for this program, but it's been something that we've been dealing with for quite some time. There's every week there's something new that's coming down from the federal government that the city is not prepared for. One minute we're getting a letter that these programs are going to be cut. The next minute we're finding out that there's an update that possibly is coming back, which creates a lot of instability and really fear also amongst local governments on how we're supposed to be taking care of our residents. Beyond just the food is also, we are currently looking at almost 80 families that are going to be unhoused because of a program that is going to be, that was supposed to go until 2030, that is going to be cut by the end of the year, and so as a council we're looking at that. But I would say that it's going to require not just local governments, but also how we work with the state to see how we're going to be able to fund these. As local government, there's no way that we're going to be able to cover all these cuts across the board, but it is also going to require us to do a lot of advocacy work on the state level to make sure that we're also getting a piece of that. And so I am very concerned individually on just everything, and I will say that, you know, it's been one of many of these in the last several years for us. So.
Okay, it's a heartbreaking issue. It's the same kind of heartbreak we feel when we have people come into us to say that they're, you know, being kicked out of an apartment building because it's being renovated and they have nowhere to go. It's the same heartbreak we're feeling, as Councilwoman Asatria just said, when we hear we're going to lose 188 emergency housing vouchers that were given to people who were homeless or at risk of homelessness or recently homeless, people that are going to have a real hard time getting back on their feet once they finally got into housing. So we see this, thank you, we see this, you know, and I'm not trying to avoid the question about food, but it's like across the board. And, you know, it touches on a bigger issue, which is just inequity, right? We have inequity in housing. We have inequity in our transportation system. We have inequity when it comes to climate and the kinds of costs that are going to be falling on our children and grandchildren because we have not been addressing it. So we have, you know, we could go on and on, but I think this is kind of the core, I think, of the campaign for the three of us. I think all three of us are thinking long-term. We're thinking of how to build a future that's going to be more equitable, how to serve younger people, today's younger people who will be stepping into our positions. What do they want? It's different than maybe what my generation, I'm a boomer, my generation, you know, generally wants different things. So, you know, these are all really tough challenges. Now, at the end of the day, we have finite financial resources, and I think everybody knows we're heading into some difficult times with a budget that's structurally imbalanced. And so we're going to have to make these decisions between what we fund and what we don't fund. And if we want to start putting more money towards some of these equity issues, we're going to have to find it by cutting something else or finding other sources of revenue. And we can't just say no to every idea that gets proposed. And it's difficult. You know, people say every revenue idea that we may come up with will bother somebody, and they'll say no. And yet we need to make the math work, and it's extremely difficult. So my plea to people is try to understand, you know, that you may not get the thing you want, or you may have to sacrifice something you want, but we're looking at the big picture, trying to make things work for the future.
This is a very tough first question. I think as both council members said, this is something that is a challenge for cities specifically. There are a lot of things that are outside of the control of local government and things that are outside of the jurisdiction of the city. But I do think that we do have opportunity here in Glendale to expand our urban forest. Maybe it could be that we are now planting fruit trees to provide more fruit for people in the community, particularly be thinking about expanding the community garden program. If you know me, you know that I started the community gardens on Monterey 18 years ago. And so those local examples have really provided essentially a safety net for many family members, many of which don't have their own piece of land to grow their own food. That is a direct savings and a direct benefit for predominantly the lower income members in our community. So I think we need to think outside of the box. There are a lot of opportunities that are essentially low cost, high impact. The community gardens is just one example. Those are 3 gardens that cost $0 to the city budget. It's self-sustaining, it's paid for by the members in that community garden, and it doesn't make a dent in our budget, which, as you're going to hear throughout this evening, if you haven't been already, we are in a tight fiscal situation. We need to be careful about how we're spending that money, and then also just being honest about what we can deliver as a city with a constrained budget.
Thank you all 3 for please.
Can I just add one tiny piece that has specifically to do with that program? The one thing I know about Glendale is that Glendale shows up for Glendale, and I've seen that time and again in the last 25 years. During my time at ANC and when we were working at the Glendale Youth Center, we actually launched an annual food drive program that was servicing roughly by the second year 1,500 families. And so I know that when there is a need, we also have amazing organizations in Glendale, and we have amazing residents in Glendale that always step up. And so I think looking at pathways of bringing these different groups together under one roof to look at different opportunities specifically for the pantry is one of the ways that we can go, and it's been tested and to be successful specifically.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your answer for that question. That was our main policy icebreaker. That was a warm-up. All right, thank you so much for doing it for the time limit. We're moving on to our next question. And, we did talk on a lot of issues in the last question. It was housing, it was transit, it was equity. We will be reading up those specific questions as we go on with this forum. So our next question is going to be from the Glendale Tenants Union. And by show of hands, how many of you all are renters here? All right, wow. I'm saying about half the room, quite a bit. So, perfect. This is the right question for this one. So Glendale has the highest percentage of renters out of all cities in California. But both LA County and national data consistently show that Glendale is also one of the most tenant-suffocating cities in the nation. What does this mean? By conservative estimates, there are roughly 60,000 rent-burdened tenants in Glendale who spend more than 38% of income on rent. Of those, 45,000 are severely rent-burdened, which means they spend more than 50% of their income just on rent alone. For context, 65% of Glendale's population are currently renters. This is a direct result of cruel policy choices that harm and immiserate the lives of about 1/3 of our city's populations. Our main form of government protection is the city's extremely lacking rental rights program, which council members have previously refused to even enforce. So the question from the Glendale Tenants Union is, how will you enforce, expand, and improve our rental protections in order to meet the gravity of this situation?
Okay. So the question is specifically about enforcing the rental rights program, or?
I believe the Glendale Tenants Union would like to hear a myriad of solutions. So maybe increase rental protections, approaching how to increase housing affordability, which could be our next question, and really extending rental rights.
Okay. Well, I think probably most of you know there was a big debate over rent control. It was before I got on council. I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, and I know Mike Van Borders here. I think he was part of that, and many other people. And obviously, the community was very divided. In the end, there was I guess you would call it a compromise solution, and I forget what we called it, but it was kind of a rent stabilization type of ordinance where, if a property owner raises the rent more than 7% in 1 year, 15% over 2 years, the tenant has the right to, I mean, they can agree and they can stay in the unit, but if they don't agree and they want to leave, the property owner has to pay a relocation fee. You know, it was something that was better than what existed before. Obviously, it didn't satisfy, a lot of people. And then the state came in with rent control, which is 5% plus CPI, which I think now would be around an 8% allowable increase with a cap of 10%. So that's where we are in Glendale. I mean, we're subject to those two. I know, I've been knocking on doors. We talk to people who are on fixed incomes, and they say, look, 8% my rent went up 8%. My Social Security is not going up 8%. So, it's obviously it's a problem we all want to fix. Long term, we can't beat the market. We have to deal with the supply situation. That's the long-term solution. We have to build more housing of all types, and I really, want to see us be able to create conditions where we're building a diverse portfolio of housing, dense housing downtown, low to mid-density housing along our commercial corridors, starting to find a way to build more townhouses and courtyard apartments and duplexes and fourplexes. And then in single-family neighborhoods, we're seeing a real increase in ADUs, which I think are great. And I think we're going to continue to see that. We should encourage that. So that's the long-term solution is housing stock. Now, we all know that this is taking decades, right? This is not going to help a person tomorrow, right? So I do think, it's worth looking at some more protections to protect against sudden and sharp increases in rent. I think that's all we can do. We can't keep rents, from going up if the market is pushing them up, but we can protect people against sharp and sudden increases. I don't know exactly how we do that. I think that's something that the community has to debate again, and I think we should go and do some opinion polls and not just listen to the loudest voices in the room. But the other thing that I'll mention, and then I'll pass it on, is one thing that we have discussed on council is tightening rent eviction protections. Some places have, I know South Pasadena put a moratorium on rent evictions so that they could study where they wanted to take it, and I haven't followed up with them, so I don't know where things end up then. But I think, we want people to be able to remodel and upgrade, property owners. We want them to be able to keep buildings in good condition. So we don't want to stop that, but we want to make evictions for renovations rare. And we want people to be able to come back to their units, have a first right to come back to their units. And during the time that they're out of the units, they need to be supported somehow. They can't just be thrown out. I think that's something in the short term that we can do. And I really hope after this election, if the three of us get elected, which we will, that I really want to work on that. Thanks.
Thank you for the answer.
Sorry.
Yeah, this is another tough one. I see it's escalating in difficulty. I think there are the bones for providing relief are there. There's a lot of great stuff that the city has done in the past, the state has now imposed, and I think it's a matter of understanding where we are with the current economic situation and how those caps and those restrictions apply to today's conditions. So I don't want to throw out, I've been carrying this theme of not throwing out empty promises. You're not going to hear that from the people here. Ironically, the people who are missing today are the ones who are chronically doing that. So I'm not going to get into that habit. There's a lot of heavy policy discussions around this issue, and I'm not armed with all the tools that I need to come out and declare something so definitively. But I do want to see more discussions that include renters specifically. I was thinking through this morning, maybe we can have a requirement for a number of renters on commissions, for example, making sure that they're at the table speaking to us and with us. I've been canvassing in South Glendale a lot. There are a lot of buildings in South Glendale that do need to be improved. And so I just want to make sure that we're not doing something that has unintended consequences. And I'll
I think it's beyond just rental rents. The cost of living has gone up significantly, and it's not just looking at how we're safeguarding rental rights or rental assistance, but how we're assisting people as a whole. And so you have increased utility rates, you have increased food costs, gas prices are skyrocketing, and so looking at different programs that make it easier for somebody to live here. I would say that I'm the council member that championed bringing about our rental assistance program, as well as our utility assistance program in increasing the amount that our seniors and those that are low-income families are able to obtain. What we found from individuals and families that were on the rental assistance, there was roughly a $500 gap in what they needed to be able to feel comfortable living in their rental units. Our rental assistance program was giving roughly around $300. We decided that we're going to give that pot of money in a different way as we move forward with the new program, and looking at how much they actually need versus the costs of today. So I think it's short-sighted just to look at rental rights. I think it's looking at all the different ways and the different pockets that we can get into to be able to lower costs in general. I will also say that I'm somebody that, when my family and I moved here from Armenia, me, my mom, my two siblings, my brother was just 1 year old. We lived with my aunt on Ivy Street, which was a one-bedroom apartment. My aunt's family had 2 kids. So we all lived in a one-bedroom, and then we moved over, when my dad came, we moved over to Myrtle Street, where I grew up there all the way to, going off to college. Shared a room with my brother and my grandma, and so I think all of these things are also lived experiences for some of us that recognize that it's not necessarily just having a roof over your head, but also the additional opportunities there are to be able to put your kids through different programs. Why our libraries are really important, because for me the library was the quiet place that I was able to study. When you don't have a backyard, the park is the place that you want to make sure that the kids have that's nearby that you can take to. So I think for me, I've always looked at everything that I've done in the last 3.5 years through the affordability lens, and all the people that are missing from that table. So I'll leave it at that.
Just one other quick one, because I don't want to denigrate landlords. There are good landlords and bad landlords. There are good tenants and bad tenants. We know that. And what I don't want is I don't want to create conditions where small landlords are being forced to sell out to these big investor groups, because I think that's going to be even worse. So that's why this is a very difficult needle to thread. But I did want to emphasize that I'm not a landlord. I'm not a tenant. I own my own home. But I really, I think we need to be careful with what we do, because we don't want to displace communities, but we also don't want to displace good property owners.
Thanks so much for your responses. Wow, what great and novel policy solutions. I have not heard this at any other forum.
We haven't had enough time to talk about anything other than soundbite.
All right, so naturally, the next question will be from Glendale Yimby. Glendale has only permitted to build around 25% of its total RENA, which is in the midway about all the other cities in terms of production around us. How will you expedite housing construction in Glendale? And do you condemn the rhetoric against Glendalians who live in apartments and in high-density developments? Bond, feel free to answer.
I think I know what you're referring to. There was a candidate who had said high-density housing brings crime. And I was a little bit floored by that, because I know that there's no facts SCAG puts out, the Southern California Association of Governments. And it's essentially a number that the city has to meet and has to upzone to allow for that number of additional units to be built in the city. So there's been a lot of rhetoric around, I don't like development, we need to stop development. A lot of doors that I knock on, people are saying, we've had enough, we don't want any more. And there are some candidates that are peddling that statement. They're like, yes, we're going to stop development. But if you know anything about land use, zoning, state law, state mandates, SCAG requirements, you know that that's not realistic, and it's not something that I think the city should be putting themselves in, which is essentially a lawsuit that they're going to lose against the state of California, like many cities have had so far. So we need to be mindful about where that growth is going. I was very happy to see the transit-oriented development along the Tropico area near the Metrolink in Glendale and South Glendale. I support that kind of upzoning, particularly in places where new residents in our community are least likely to get in a car and drive. So whether it's going to work or to your doctor's appointment or to the grocery store, I would like to see that growth and development in places where you're least likely to get in your car to run your errands. That's what I'd like to see, particularly as a transportation planner. We're all very concerned about congestion. Driving continues to be, and has been for a very long time, the primary mode of transit, and I'll be honest, it's going to be for a very long time into the future. But I think we can chip away at that. We're not here to take away anybody's cars. You're welcome to drive wherever you want, and park wherever you want. But we're talking about these new residents in our community and these new units that are being built. I want to be very mindful about where they're going and be smart about that kind of development.
Aren't we lucky to have a planner on the dais? Yeah. Professor folks, thank you so much.
Okay. So this whole question of development obviously is one of the major things that a council gets involved with. So I'll just say a few things, and these are obvious things, I know you know, but we don't build housing generally, other than some affordable housing developments that we've, where we've basically been the developer. But we don't build housing, we create conditions for the market to build housing. That means the right zoning, that means the right policies. And we have to demonstrate that those conditions have been met in order for our housing element to be approved by Sacramento. And we've done that. So we have two HCD's housing and community development. Is it housing and community development? Yes. Is that what it's called? To HCD's satisfaction, we have gotten an approved housing element. Now it wasn't easy. They kicked it back many times, and we had to make changes and improvements. But we do have a certified housing element. Now the market isn't doing its share. It's not. We're seeing construction at a rate that's really not faster than during the last 8-year housing cycle. The last 8-year cycle, we were given a RENA number of about 2,000 units. It was like 2015 or something, which was supposedly our need. This current RENA cycle, 8-year cycle, which we're in the middle of, we have a number of approximately 13,500, a massive increase. And, people, when they saw that, they thought, oh my God, we're going to start building all this housing. Actually, the housing production has not increased in its rate from the last cycle to this cycle. And that's because of the market, that's because of interest rates, that's because of land costs, construction costs, and many other things that are needed. Again, we don't build the housing, we just make the conditions available. So, there's not much we can do about that, but I do think we can, and I don't know if we'll talk about permitting later on, but I think there are a lot of things in our permitting area where we can streamline the process, where we're difficult to deal with. And I see somebody from Burbank clapping their hands. I think they're any better. But that is something, that can help on the margins. But really where I want to work, and I think my colleagues here also feel the same way, is how can we tweak our codes and how can we work with to get two things done. One is create the conditions where developers are building more small to medium scale housing, back to those duplexes and fourplexes and courtyard apartments and garden apartments and townhouses that Glendale used to build. You go all around Glendale and you see all this amazing housing stock. It's all deteriorating. How do we make sure that's getting replaced? You know, those big apartment buildings downtown, they have their place. I wouldn't want to live in one. So I want to see more of a variety of housing types. And the other thing, and this is so important, is how do we get people building for sale housing, ownership housing? Because we know that the average cost of a home in Glendale is $1.4 million. People that are not my generation, you know, they're more like their generation, you know, are desperate. Like they're saying, I want to own my own place, you know, and how do I even begin that journey? So we need to find ways to so that more of that moderate cost, and it's not going to be cheap. I mean, it's still going to be like close to $1 million, right? Or like $700,000 to $1 million. But like, how do we create some of that stock that people can start stepping into home ownership and building equity? It's something I really, really want us to work on. And actually, the interesting thing is, it's one thing that across the whole council right now, whatever, you know, the political perspective, everybody is in favor of ownership housing. And not because owners are better citizens than renters. I reject that. I think it's a disgusting comment. That's not why. I'm just saying it because many people want to own, right? So we want to make that possible.
I'm the only council member that lives in a condo, and the only reason I was able to afford that condo was because it was at the fall of the market in 2011, and there was the first-time home buyers program that I applied through, which gave me the opportunity to have this place, which has now, in price, gone up to what I consider insane. My condo, which is in a building from the 1970s, should not cost around $800,000. So that's what it's looking at right now. So I will also say that I've always been just for smart development, and for me what that means is that you are taking into account all the other resources that you need as you're building housing. That includes the green spaces around that development. That includes looking at how you're keeping up with your dispatch, with your public safety. One of the reasons we're one of the best cities in the nation is because we're also one of the safest. We're very, very special in that. And ensuring that as this housing is increasing, how we're keeping up with our public safety is also going to be really important, because our fire department, which responds to emergencies now, I don't want to come to a place where we're going now from 500 response to 10, 15, because that is the difference between life and death for our residents. And so I think one of the things I also want us to look at, and this is something I said time and again to staff, and I think they're friendly looking at it, is when we talk about affordable housing, a lot of our programs are for individuals that are make $50,000 or less. So what you'll see in these density bonus housing that developers come through is the extremely low and low that qualify. But there's an opportunity for us to look at a local policy that increases that, because the people that are making between that $50,000 and $100,000 a year are actually the most vulnerable in the sense that they do not have help with food, they don't have help with education for their children, they don't have help with healthcare costs. They are literally, I say, one flat tire away from the cycle towards homelessness starting, right? And we all know that the average American doesn't have more than $1,000 if that in their savings account, and so looking at that population, some may, shake their heads and say, you're talking about $100,000. Well, when you look at the data, $100,000 in a place like Glendale or Los Angeles is like $40,000 in other states. And so being mindful of the cost of living in general. I would also say that I have one of my best friends just moved into that big apartment building next to Stars on Brand. He's paying $3,500 for a one-bedroom apartment that does not even fit a 4-person dining table. So I want us to also be mindful about what kind of incentives we're giving to allow for these developments to have larger units for families with children and opportunities. So it's not just building housing, but the multi-generational housing that we need to build.
Thank you for those diverse answers. And since we're talking about housing affordability, I went ahead and checked, and I believe Glendale is actually the top affordable housing producer per capita in LA County. And that's nothing to scoff at, considering that we only have 200,000 residents in the city. All right. The next question will be from the Glendale Environmental Coalition, which is a leading organization on making Glendale a greener and more environmentally friendly city. They have 2 questions. The first one is, what is your position on how high a priority climate change action plan should be for the city? And what are the most effective local actions Glendale can take to help slow climate change and global warming?
Want me to go first? Please, I'll go first. I'll go first. Well, I think, this is near and dear to my heart, some of these issues, because I was at least one of the founders of the Glendale Environmental Coalition. So, the question was, I guess, multifaceted on the climate action plan about how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes, so just to summarize, it's going to be, do you believe in climate change? How are you going to help? Do you believe in climate change, and how are you going to help make Glendale combat climate change in terms of our local emissions and what we can do in our control and grasp?
Okay, I believe in climate change, and I don't believe in Santa Claus.
Thank you.
I think, we are making progress with our energy system, and that is the starting point, right? We want a system that is reducing and will eventually eliminate the combustion of fossil fuels to produce electricity. We have a long way to go. I mean, if you've been following, the project with the Grayson Power Plant, there was originally a proposal back in 2017 to repower that, or replace that whole aging plant with a more modern, but still entirely fossil fuel system. Me and many other people, some of the people here in the audience, I can see, we fought against that. And GWP ultimately did come to a consensus and decided that, technology had changed. Now you can store power in batteries, so you can take clean energy from outside of Glendale that you can import, or from solar energy that you produce here. You can store it in the battery, and you can then dispatch it at the times of day when it's in short supply. And that's a very smart way to manage energy. And now they're big proponents of battery. They see the battery strategy as something that is both a cost savings and an opportunity to make the system greener and more resilient. So we made a lot of progress. That system is going in as we speak. It's a little delayed, but by the end of the summer, it should be operational. Now we still have a lot of work to do. We have to make sure that the stuff that is going into the battery is clean. So what we bring in over our transmission lines, we have to more and more, replace contracts that are for natural gas and contract for solar and wind and geothermal. And the Trump administration is making that harder. Those projects are harder to find. There's more competition for them. So it's a tough world out there, but we're going to keep working on it. We're going to keep building out solar on city properties. If you haven't noticed, there have been 2 that we did. One recently we unveiled at the rooftop of the library right next to us. And we've got a huge one coming into the sports complex, parking garage, parking lot. And we've got another, even the biggest one will be in Brand Park on a disused landfill. So we're doing all these things. There's a lot in the pipeline. We've got a lot more to do, but I think that's that's the starting point. You know, there's a lot more I could go on and on and on about other things we should do. I just do want to say one thing is that the climate action and adaptation plan is somewhat unique because of the adaptation part. We didn't just do a climate action plan, we did specifically a climate action and adaptation plan. And adaptation is going to be an absolutely critical part of what we do. We're going to have to deal with increasingly unreliable sources of water. We're going to have to deal with increasing extreme heat, and we're going to have to deal with increasing fire danger. So those are also climate solutions, and where we can find synergies between reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adaptation, like planting a lot of trees, those are like the best places to be working. So that's where I would like to focus.
Environmental issues are, for me, I look through environmental justice as the lens. I think it's important for us to recognize that Glendale is home to the largest immigrant population in all of California, more than Los Angeles. Over 54% of our residents are foreign-born. And if we're not reaching our communities where they're at, we're failing them, and we're failing all the causes that we're fighting for. And that includes the environment and climate change. I've talked about this time and again when it's come up for our rebate programs and our incentive programs, that whether you're trying to switch out your refrigerator, I think the previous program offered like $50 for if you turned in your old refrigerator to get a new one. And my comment was, well, if the new one doesn't cost $50, that's not incentive enough for somebody that is low income to be able to switch out to a new one that would not only, end up saving energy, but also end up saving them money. So I think for us, it's critical to look at not just incentive programs that we have currently, but how we restructure them in a way that gets rid of a lot of the paperwork and the upfront costs that come with things like heat pumps, changing up your heat pumps. I've recently changed mine. You're talking about roughly $20,000, that which the average person does not have sitting in their bank account to be able to make that transition and then go apply and get the rebate back, right? And so when we talk about waste and reducing waste, you will hear me time and again talk about this at the council. I live in an apartment building that has trash chutes. My building does not even know that the trash bins downstairs have changed. Okay, so it's a 50-unit building, and so unless we are educating the future generation through programs through schools, because I also know as a daughter of immigrants that immigrant kids go home and teach their parents how to do things. It's the way of life, right? Also how to fix and use the TV and many other things around the house. But I think it's really important for us to take into account that most of our population actually does not live in single-family homes, and how we're doing proper outreach on all of these climate change issues as it pertains to renters and people living in multi-family units. I'll also say that however unfortunate this may be, some people care, some people don't when it comes to climate change, but everybody cares about their wallet. And so I think it's also important for us as we're educating individuals on programs that are available. I'll point to my aunt who was changing her landscape. I told her, hey, have you looked at native plants? And she didn't even know what they were, right? She is your average resident that lives here. And so we can either be upset that our neighbors are not doing enough, or we can take that moment and say, I recognize that this person is concerned about putting food on their table over what climate change is happening now, but how do I use this opportunity to get them to move into that direction? And so we as a city have amazing resources, including our Glendale Water Park, if you don't know, has this really cool dynamic site where you can actually go and pick your plants and do your whole landscape, but most people don't even know that it exists, right? And so I think getting that information out and building programs that I think are built backwards is the way to go for expanding on our climate change activities.
Thank you for the question. So I served on the city's sustainability commission. I was its first chairperson when it was created. I also served on the board of the Glendale Environmental Coalition for a few years, and then I stepped down to run for city council. When I served on the sustainability commission, we had just started, or we're starting, the formation of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And I think it was adopted last year by city council. If you're not familiar with the document, I encourage everybody to take a look at it. I think to Councilmember Satrian's point about prioritizing and making sure that we're meeting residents where they're at. I think the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan has a lot of really good policies that specifically lend itself to meeting folks where they're at, seeing where their priorities are. Just one example is wildfire mitigation and making sure that we're prepared for the next big one. So we had the Eden fire not long ago. As I'm knocking on doors in the canyons and other vulnerable areas in our community, that is a top concern. And so people look at the Climate Action Adaptation Plan as some kind of, progressive agenda, this Green New Deal that's all about like taking away people's fossil fuels. But there is really good policy priorities and objectives and specific things that the city can do that can mitigate wildfire, that can provide accessible EV chargers for people who don't live in single-family homes. We have the GOAT program now, if you're not familiar. We have goats that come and eat the brush on our hillsides. That kind of stuff, that real tangible thing that provides actual benefits for Glendale residents is mentioned in the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. So I don't want folks to think this is just some environmental green agenda. There's really good stuff in there that we can all benefit from. I also think part of that is making sure that we implement the pedestrian master plan. This is a planning document that was adopted by City Council several years ago. I happened to serve on the advisory committee when that plan was being developed. It's a really good plan that talks about how we can make our streets safer for people to be able to walk in our city and to do so confidently and safely. My mom is in her 70s, as are my in-laws, and as they're walking more in our neighborhoods because perhaps they feel less confident driving, I want them to feel empowered and to be able to maintain their independence at that age, and also for younger folks who don't yet have driver's licenses. And at this rate, there are many kids who may not ever get driver's licenses, for them to be able to walk safely in our community as well. So that ties into sustainability, ties into the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And I talked about EV chargers, accessible to renters. Shade trees is another big thing. The city's done a very good job of installing shade trees where they have the most impact. In South Glendale predominantly, we are lacking shade. But it's also in South Glendale where people are most likely to be walking to their destinations. And having shade trees and having shade on our streetscapes is just one additional thing that encourages people to walk and not get in their car to go just a few blocks to get to the grocery store. So those are the kind of things that I'm interested in, is looking at those like low cost, high impact policy priorities that, yes, achieve our sustainability goals, but also directly benefit the resident. And it does it quickly. We're not having to wait 20, 30 years in the hopes that we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, we're striving for that as well. But I want to see those direct benefits and see those quickly.
If you want to indulge, I was going to maybe touch on this. What's that? No, there's some candidates that are peddling an idea about how we're going to magically lower our utility rates. Should I touch on that?
Yes, please.
He says yes. So
Well, I think everybody knows the utility rates have gone up very sharply, and it's painful. And yeah, I get it. But there's a lot of just a lot of false promises being made. And one, I was astonished to hear that one of the candidates said if he doesn't reduce utility rates by 50%, he is going to resign after 2 years. I mean, literally said this at our last meeting.
Last week.
At our last candidate forum. I mean, wow. Sounds like somebody who wants to spend 2 years building name recognition and then run for Congress again. But there's an idea that's being discussed by several candidates, and it doesn't work. And I want to try to explain, because in the candidate forums you don't have a chance to explain this. So what they're saying is that we have these gas engines, these backup engines that we're putting into service right now, and that we have, artificially limited their output. But if we didn't do that, we could run them more, and we could then take that excess energy and sell it into the market, earn money, and that would allow us to reduce rates. Sounds kind of plausible, right? It sounds like, yeah, if you didn't know anything about how energy markets work, you might think that would work. There are a lot of problems with that. I mean, there's some basic operational problems. Like in order to sell energy as an energy trader, not a one-time sale, do it on a regular basis, you need to be part of these energy exchanges. And it's very complicated. There's like overnight trading and there's same-day trading and all these platforms. And we've been working on getting access to these platforms. We actually do want it because there's an opportunity to sell the energy out of our batteries when the market peaks and prices are really high. We want to be able to hit those markets and make money. So we want to get on these platforms, but there's a lot of legal and regulatory stuff we have to go through. It's going to take years. So his 2 years, I mean, we're not even going to be able to start this for 2 years. Okay, the next problem is, they're not thinking about when you start to produce more, when you start to burn more gas, you have to buy pollution credits from the A2MD, from the air district. Basically, somebody else in our air base that has to be reducing pollution, you buy that right to pollute from them so that you can run these engines more. That costs a lot of money, and they're hard to acquire. So, has anybody factored that into the cost? And then, after all that, you're going to be selling energy when we don't need it, which is basically when nobody else really needs it, when there's a lot of energy in the market, and utilities are struggling to buy green energy because they want the credits to meet their state-mandated requirements. They don't want fossil fuel power. It's not like you can never sell any, but there's not going to be a market for it that you can actually generate any significant revenue. Now the final thing is, even if it worked, it's pretty damn immoral when you think about what they're saying. They're saying they want to pollute our communities around the power plant, Pelincone, Glenwood, the Riverside Rancho. You're going to basically throw these communities under the bus, pollute more, add to cancer risk, add to childhood asthma, all the reasons why we got rid of the old system. You're going to do that to make a buck, right? I mean, to me, that is deeply immoral, and it's also akin to, this idea we close our landfill in Glen Oaks Canyon. I'm sure the same theory would apply. Let's just reopen the landfill, which is unlined, which is leaking, and let other cities dump their garbage. Burbank, you want to dump your garbage over here? Then they will pay you. I mean, you'll pay us. I'm sorry. You dump your garbage, you pay us, and we'll make some money. That's the kind of city we want to be. No, thank you. I don't want to be that kind of city.
Consensus is, and I presume the same on the dais, unless you want to add some just last minute remarks. All right. Well, this was a big question, so I really appreciate all three of your responses. You talked about anthropogenic climate change, carbon emissions, the impacts on human health, and you reminded me on how when I was in elementary school, I brought home a efficient water shower head, and I was like, Mom and Dad, please install this on our shower system. Yes. All right, we move over to some social issues, a little less on the policy, more on the social side. So this is from a group called Multi-Cheap Podcast. Their group goal is to destigmatize Armenian LGBTQ+ experiences and promote mental health resources. So the question is, how will you ensure that LGBTQ+ children and their families are protected and represented in the city of Glendale? Woo!
first elected gay Armenian.
Yes, that is one. That is a first step.
Yeah.
Is that would happen? Yeah, I think the city government, our representatives, the departments, staff, the government, the bureaucracy of the city of Glendale can definitely play a role. We have the Library, Arts and Culture department, the commission. They put out really good programming, bringing cultures together, bringing communities together. And I think it goes along with my campaign slogan, which is "Let's Build Community." I have grown up here. I've been here my entire life. I've always felt safe and comfortable in this community for a very long time, but up until pretty much 2 years ago, when things kind of shifted, the political winds went in another direction, and all of a sudden I realized I may be in a different community all of a sudden. And so I want to turn away from that. I want to turn the page. I want to bring people together. I think that involves the city having much more cultural programming, using our facilities, using our ability as a city to pump out more programming that brings us together, that's more positive, that builds bridges. And that's what I'm standing up for, and that's part of the reason why I'm running, is I want us to be a positive beacon for kids growing up in our community. I didn't have much of that when I was growing up. I came in all right, but I think there are people that are hungry for that in our community, and I'd like to be a part of that change.
I think our role as leaders always is to ensure that every member of your community and every single resident is safe, is protected, feels respected, and treated with dignity. I will also say that I think there's a lot of opportunities on how we're bringing communities together. And I would also argue, I say this over and over again, because I think sometimes the loud voices try to paint a different picture of Glendale, and I talk about this all the time. I got the chance to be your mayor during the wildfires. And the way that I will say it again and again, that Glendale shows up for Glendale and people in Glendale show up for each other, is very, very unique. I think our diversity is our greatest asset. I think our school speaks 68 languages, and it is the most beautiful thing for me, for us to be a regional connector city that sits at the heart of that. That is one of the safest cities in the nation. And I think at the end of the day, equal access to programming and safe streets are a concern for every child and every family in our city. So.
I don't know what else to say, except I think we can talk about programs and things like that, but I think ultimately it's about, modeling tolerance, modeling love, modeling caring, and being open when it comes. I think part of the question was about mental health, right? So, it's being open as leaders that none of us are immune. I mean, I've had my own struggles. My dad was all his life was a bipolar disorder, manic depressive. I've inherited some of that. I've had to deal with it. And just being open and talking about that and destigmatizing it, I think is critically important. And then just, kind of stop the lying, stop the rhetoric, stop the hate that we're seeing. And I think if the three of us are elected, we're sending a message. We're sending a message to the people that are trying to build a political platform on the basis of intolerance and hate and lies. And we need to show that that's not something that people of Glendale are willing to accept.
Thank you so much for those responses. Please go ahead.
By the way, the city of Glendale and the city council actually just signed a contract also with Gateway Hospitals. It's a certain period that's going to be, but Gateway Hospitals is one of the biggest mental health and substance abuse centers all over the region. But they also moved their admin building and some services to Glendale. And we are seeing an increase in both mental health needs as well as substance abuse needs. And I think it's, especially the substance abuse is not talked about enough. I think people are slowly talking about mental health, but they're not talking, there's a shame factor associated with family members. And the quicker that we can get help for family members and friends on substance abuse, I think it's also going to be a critical point. But I did want to use this opportunity to let the people that are watching or that are here that Gateway Hospitals is now in Glendale, and I think it's a great resource for us to turn to.
Thanks so much for those responses, you folks. PFLAG chapter in Glendale had a very similar question, and I believe you guys have answered it. I just want to reiterate that the community really deeply cares about these questions on inclusion, on diversity, on access, on equality, equity, all these things. These are not just buzzwords. These are real people that live in our city. They have real impacts. They have been impacted in negative light, in negative ways by former and current council members, and this is why we're asking these questions. And we want to make sure that our council candidates that are here at these forums are answering the right way, which you have. So thanks so much for those answers. I'm really excited about this next question. So this next question comes from the Crescenta Valley High School Democrats. Thank you for being here as you do in the audience. The question is, when young people, it is a reality that not many students are aware of their student representation on our city commissions. CVHS Democrats supports expanding civic engagement and voting rights for every student. What actions do you plan to take to increase student participation and awareness of the legislative process? How do you ensure that you're hearing from students who don't typically attend city council meetings? So largely the question is, how will you help connect students in the student body with city council? Please feel free.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm really excited about this on my list. So, I got involved in politics when I was 15, so for me, it's kind of carrying it forward. One of the first things I did as a council member was to introduce for us to have student seats on our commissions, because I think youth need to have a seat at the table. And every Tuesday we see a lot of folks that show up. But they tend to be on the older side, but the future generation is the one that's going to inherit the city, but also how we build a multi-generational city. We've talked about, looking at some parking lots that we can have food trucks at, where there's a DJ, where teenagers can hang out, because truth be told, I know that the Americana and the Marketplace are the two places that I hear my friends dropping off their kids at. And there should be more places for teenagers to do things. I'm somebody that actually started running national committees, Glendale Chapter's internship program in 2007. At this point, there's like hundreds of local students that have gone through that program. And I think there is something about being a mentor to younger people. I did introduce for us to have summer at City Hall. And that died a really quick death, but I'm happy to bring it back up again. I feel like I have the votes. But I think it's also important for us to recognize that none of us up here are from the youth category, so I look forward to hearing from the youth about what the youth want.
I agree, and I'm excited that Ellen has in the past talked about bringing more youth and students into City Hall. That's something that I'm very much interested in supporting as well. I had mentioned earlier that I had started the community gardens at the age of 22, and not many people my age at the time are involved civic engagement. And it's not because they didn't want to. I think in many cases they just don't know how. They don't know what opportunities are available to them, what even City Hall does. And I learned that at the age of 22, and that kind of propelled me to where I am today and where I may be tomorrow. So I think having that opportunity for kids is really important. I've been engaging with high school kids throughout this campaign, and being around them and having that youthful energy and seeing their interest in exploring, their curiosity, and learning so much about what we do as older adults is really rewarding for me personally. I'd like to see more of that. I think our local government can do the same. I do support the Student Commissioner Program. I think it's been very helpful. I've now served multiple terms with many student commissioners. And some have brought up really cool ideas. I think during my time on the Sustainability Commission, which I served with Mike, this wasn't his idea. One of the girls on the Sustainability Commission, she thought of doing like a prom dress swap. So, you buy a dress, you wear it once, then what? Maybe you pass it on to somebody else who can't afford one or doesn't have one. You want to exchange it instead of buying a new one. So I would have never thought of that idea. I don't think anybody my age would have thought of that idea, but a high school kid came up with that. And I think, that's just one micro example. I think we can learn a lot from kids. The last thing I'll say is, I think having kids around at City Hall, at our council meetings, participating in meetings, may contribute to more civility among our older adults and our population, and can help bring down the rhetoric, bring down the temperature in the room, and bring more civility to the public discourse.
I like what you both said, but Councilmember Satrian said, let the youth tell us what the youth want, or something like that. Yeah, when I get this question, I would go back to the folks that are asking and saying, you guide us, you help us figure out ways to engage you better, or let's iterate back and forth, let's work together, because it's not like I don't live in that world anymore. I'm a few years away from having been in high school, and it's like, and times have changed. So yeah, I'd like to work together on stuff like that. I think it's part of a broader issue we have where our youth are not as politically involved and engaged as they really need to be. Right? We're making decisions now that are going to affect the lives of high school students more than they're going to affect my life, because they're just going to be on this planet for longer, in this city for longer. So how do we find ways to politically engage young people, not just high school, but college and people in their 20s and 30s, how do we get them more politically involved? I think it's so important. I don't know how to do it, but like there's Crescenta Valley High School Democrats. Is there a similar organization in Glendale High School, at Hoover, at the other schools? Are they coordinated together? Are they working together? I think, we kind of need a movement. And a movement, I mean, I know, younger people get very activated around big global social issues like Gaza, like Ukraine, and, things like that. But I don't know, how do you get people activated, politically engaging? Stuff that's right here, right now. It's just so important.
Thank you all for those responses. I would like to mention, if you are a young person in the audience, aka under 40, or if you're watching on live stream, please attend Glendale City Council meetings. There are usually 1 or 0 young people there. Your voice matters too. Glendale Council candidates, Glendale Council members represent you as well. You pay taxes, get in the system. All right.
Young kids 25 and under.
recreation that is enhancing civic engagement and collaborative support of elected and future elected officials with their goals in equity, inclusion, affordability, opportunity, environmental sustainability, and access to democratic government. So we're a little more on the policy side again. And third question is something that I think is ringing true in a lot of our minds. And that is, would you support the creation of an ice-free zone, such have been done in Minneapolis and Chicago? Would you support the creation of a relief fund to help families impacted by the ice rays? And generally, where's your stance on ice, and how would you support immigrant population in Glendale?
Well, I took the last one, so I think it's only here. That's
Okay.
I think I made my position about ICE very clear at the forum on Thursday. I think the current use and way in which the federal government is using ICE to terrorize our community and Glendale specifically is completely unacceptable. I was very happy to hear that the city council not long ago had canceled their contract with ICE to use the city's jail. And so I've been clear about that. I am very curious, and I have gotten some questions during the campaign as I'm meeting with folks. What more can the city do? That's something I'm still learning more about. There has been talks about ice-free zones, on city property specifically. That's something that I'm interested in. I'd like to learn more about that. And it's something that, obviously I think I would support. And I also just, want to draw a contrast because there are other candidates who chose not to be here today. And I want to make sure that everybody here and the public is well aware of what Patrick Murphy had said online, which is that it is his view that GPD should be fully cooperating with ICE, which is actually against state law. So I need to make that clear because it's important for a lot of people in our community. There are our neighbors, people who are working in our community, people we may know. It could be a family member, it could be a friend that is actively being terrorized by ICE in our city, and that's totally unacceptable, and it's totally tone deaf coming from a council candidate.
We've seen the impact of the ice rays hit Glendale really, really hard. You can hear that with every conversation that you have with a small business owner, regardless of what industry, who has employees, even with proper paperwork, are afraid to come in to work, how that's impacted our local economy. I'm sitting in front of you as the first immigrant woman to be elected to the city council. This is deeply personal. I will also say that I think it also requires us as leaders not to do things that are performative, but don't actually result in safeguarding your immigrant communities and only putting a target. I'm not interested in rhetoric or headlines that make you feel good, but in reality, you're not really doing anything. I'm looking for opportunities. I would say that when the ice rays happened, I immediately contacted staff and said, we need to put together a resource guide that is in every language that people can turn to. We also have to recognize what our limitations are as government, but how we become the source of information for the resources that are available out there for those communities and for those residents. And so unequivocally, I joined the students in the protests. I stand by that. And for anybody that questions what the immigrant communities bring to cities and to the United States, you just have to look at Glendale, which is one of the safest cities in the nation.
That's right.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit more about some of these other candidates in a minute. in a minute, but I think we all, probably all in this room, feel the same way about the fact that we're being terrorized by lawless law enforcement, right? They're picking people up because of how they look and how they sound and where they work, often without warrants. There have been cases in Glendale where they have come and identified specific individuals at warrants and picked them up as they were released from our jail. And like, oh, that's okay. That's okay. But when they're going into, you know, the car washes and the Home Depots and just randomly sweeping up people without really knowing whether they have any criminal record or not, most of them don't, then that's really unacceptable. And I don't know how many people know of the case of Julio Pena. I learned of this from Jenny. Is Jenny here? Jenny was here. Jenny, do you know Ms. Skinner's back there? Is she left. Anyway, she did tell me about, there was a case right here in Glendale. We don't make the headlines as much as some other cities, but right here there was a case of a man who was coming back from a dialysis appointment, and he was picked up in front of his house. He was, I mean, the cruel part is that he was sent to Adelanto, and nobody knew where he was for a couple of weeks. I mean, his family and his lawyers couldn't get him, and they finally got to him, and they found him. And this was, written up in the press. They found him intubated and unconscious, but chained, manacled to his bed. He's going to run away. And eventually he got out, and he died shortly afterwards. He was, obviously he was ill, but that couldn't have helped. This stuff is happening here, and it's heartbreaking, it's frustrating, and there's not a lot we can do about it. And yes, I did bring up at one council meeting these ice-free zones because I read about LA doing something or some other cities, and our staff had put together a memo which they sent to us. I read it briefly, and it does sound like it's really one of these things that's probably more symbolic. It's not really going to have much impact. Sometimes symbolism is still important, so I don't want to rule it out, but I don't think it's going to make a difference. But I do want to mention, two other areas that maybe we can figure out a way to provide support for community groups that are doing things like providing, food and rental assistance to people who have lost a breadwinner, lost a source of income because a family member has been taken and they're struggling. I think that's something we can do that's positive, and also provide more legal information, legal assistance. And some cities are doing that to help family members, find their loved ones and then get them out, right? I do want to mention that Alex said, what Patrick Murphy said about ICE and the Glendale PD should collaborate. He did try to walk that back. He tried to fudge it. I don't know. I don't really want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I have heard that his wife has been on social media saying, "Let ICE do their job." That was the quote I heard. Just let ICE do their job. So I think we can kind of get a sense of where that family's head is at. The other one is there's a clip of Dr. Alex saying, and I'm going to quote it because I just couldn't believe it. It says, "We were targeted by these democratic, communist, socialist thugs because they wanted Glendale to cancel a contract that had with the federal authorities for deporting illegal immigrants." So he was mocking us for having done this. What he doesn't know is that our police chief was fully in support of this because, as they say, that the only thing, what does a cop hate most? A good cop. What do they hate most? They hate a bad cop the most because it ruins their reputation. They wanted us to close this, right? I mean, they didn't hesitate. When we talked about this, the chief immediately went and did it. So that's what we're dealing with in this election. We're dealing with people who are not going to be thinking of these things the way we do. And even though we may not be able to help a whole lot, I don't want people on council who would, maybe be okay with a detention center here. And I think they would be.
Thank you for your response. It's a very difficult question, very difficult answers. I will say that immigrants make this city great. They are what makes this city great. And I am sure everyone who's died echoes those sentiments. Thank you for that response from each and every one of you. Moving on to our last two questions. They'll be from both of our sponsors for today's People's Forum. First one's from GUSD Parents. They exist to provide facts and resources to empower everyone to advocate and to support public education in order to protect this fundamental part of our democracy. We are actively engaged in supporting local and state candidates, ballot propositions, and support public school students. Their question is, while the Board of Education oversees government schools, we've seen in recent years that the important role that city government can play in protecting and defending public education, teachers, students, staff, families, etc. Alternatively, the same can be said for councilors that want to cause harm. In what ways would you work to bridge the gap between the city government and the Board of Education, which are two different government institutions? And what opportunities for collaboration and mutual benefit would you work towards to achieve these goals? Helen.
So I'll say I think there's a lot of opportunities to collaborate with our GUSD, and I'll also say that I'm kind of disappointed that we haven't been able to make much headway in those spaces. And that includes, for example, joint use of our schools sites. After school, it's been many, many years now that year after year, mayor after mayor will go and we'll meet with GUSD wanting to look at the different sites that have already been identified in order for us to, city would take care of it, would maintain it after, but it would be open for our residents to be able to use the basketball courts, the tennis courts, and the other recreational opportunities that are available within each neighborhood at every school. And so I think how we also collaborate in getting the resources that are available at City Hall, one of the best ways that you can reach your residents about programs is through the students and the student portal. So I think there is an opportunity for community outreach and engagement working with the schools, but I also want to make sure that we're doing a better job, not just executive to executive, but elected to elected, and how we communicate in times of crisis. I'll also say that it's very difficult being on one body and then that's not getting equal information or timely information. And I can speak to this for the wildfires openly. And I hope our GUSD partners don't take offense to this, but I think especially when you're an active council member or you're a mayor at the time, and I was putting out information about, please stay home, or, here are the protocols for today and so forth. And then I had thousands of parents messaging saying, well, you're telling us to do this, but then the schools aren't open, right? And we're not getting any direction from the schools about how they're safeguarding the kids. So which one is it? Do you want us to keep them there? And I can't speak for the schools, right? And so I think there has to be, and I'm pretty sure there's been many times where there's things happening in the city and the school district. It would have been great for them to know. So I think that there's better opportunities for communication between the two bodies. But it is also a huge misconception in the city that somehow the city and the city council also has jurisdiction. As a matter of fact, we don't even give them the permit. Someone contacted me about the Google High School pool a couple of weeks ago about the permit, and it's not even the city that does that.
I also think these joint use agreements would be really nice to have. I do not know why we do not have a partnership with GUSD yet, but I'm committed to making sure that we get there. I am an urban planner, and I'm constantly thinking about how we can improve the public space, our urban fabric, and just making sure that we have spaces for people to come together, to gather, to socialize, whether you're a kid in school or a senior who is increasingly isolated as they're getting older. to people my age who just want a place to hang out. So I think Pacific Park and Edison Elementary is a great example of a community hub, particularly in an area where there's not much park space, there's not much space for people to gather, no public plazas other than that facility itself. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for, particularly in South Glendale where we do not have enough park space, we do not see places for people to gather. I would like to look at that and prioritize that. It is, again, one of those, because I'm constantly thinking about the budget situation and the fiscal crisis that we're in, and I want to be realistic with what I am offering and what I'm proposing for the next 4 years. And so, again, low cost, high impact. These are facilities that already exist in our communities, and if it requires that we have some kind of joint agreement, I'm sure we've got lawyers, we're paying them big bucks, both on the city side and the school side. I'm sure we can come up with something and make it work so that we are working harmoniously in our community, and we're not pointing fingers and we're working together instead.
We do have a joint use agreement at Pacific Edison, I think. Is that the one you're mentioning? Yeah, so we have a model. I actually am not sure why this has been so difficult, because I know, especially our now Mayor Kasakian has been talking about this for a long time and pushing on this, and he brings it up all the time that, there's just, this siloing of park space and playground and sports facilities. And like, why can't we make these available to the general public when the school's not using them? And it's good for the school because we would then be financially supporting the upkeep of those facilities. So it would bring money into the school. I know, there's always concerns about who's going to maintain it, and safety and liability and all that kind of stuff. I know it's not simple, but we have a model. We do it in one place. I don't know why we don't do it elsewhere. I think in general we really do need to work together better. We're just too isolated from one another. Other things I know that are big issues around the community are the safety of these e-motors that people see, kids riding around often without helmets, but even when they have helmets, they're riding these e-dirt bikes or e-motors very, very fast. They're riding them to school. I don't know if they're parking them in school. Are they allowing them to park them in school? I don't know what's going on, but we really need the schools to help educate parents that these are very, very dangerous devices. Besides the fact that they're illegal, they're very dangerous devices. And these are the kinds of things that, we get hit with the responsibility to do the law enforcement piece, but that education piece has to come from the schools. And I guess the other thing, I'm surprised that Alec, you didn't mention it, is like just the whole pickup and drop off of students around school. It's just like it's crazy. And it didn't used to be like that, right? A lot of us, I didn't grow up here, but I walked, I rode my bike, I took a school bus. I never had a parent drop me off at school. It's very alien to me. And now it just seems like everywhere. And even if it's just, even if it's just not that far, parents do it anyway. They had this walk to school day, and I was at Verdugo Woodlands Elementary, and I was walking to school, and I was walking along with a parent, and I said, where do you live? And he just lives like really close. I said, well, do you do this every day? He goes, no, because we're usually just rushing out of the house. So I drop my kid. So I don't know. We need to work with them to figure out better, maybe, bus options. Maybe there's stuff on our side. We have a responsibility on our side to make sure it's safe to walk to school, it's safe to bike to school. That's where we come into the equation. But we got to work together and try to get around this because there's no, it's just such a nightmare for anybody who lives here at school, and all the traffic and all the greenhouse gas emissions, everything we don't want, right? Because of that.
Well, thank you so much for the collaborative spirit, you three council candidates. By a show of hands, by the way, who has attended USD or has children who attend USD or nephews, friends? Wow. I'm seeing like 90% of the room. Public schools pivotal to democracy. They are pivotal to our society. And we're really lucky we have 3 council candidates who are support of the school system. All right. That was actually a beautiful transition, by the way, to our last question from Glendale Out. It is a grassroots organization dedicated to building, evolving, and moving forward queer voices in the narrative that is Glendale. The question, however, is, considering the ongoing struggle over non-car transportation in Glendale, such as bike lanes and the upcoming bus rapid transit line, how do you plan to quickly fulfill the city's transportation and climate change goals? More specifically, how would you improve the Glendale B-line, transit stops, pedestrian safety, and non-vehicular modes of travel?
Well, I'll just say that we're going to elect a transportation planner. A UCLA graduate with a master's degree. He's going to help us solve all of our problems.
Yeah, so it kind of stood out to me a couple of years ago when the city, the Public Works Department was putting out a staff report about how to improve the bus shelters in the city of Glendale. And I remember very specifically reading the staff report and realizing that no intercept survey was done to talk to actual bus riders about what they think the improvements of bus shelters should be. And I thought, oh my gosh, we have some work to do. So I know that if we want to encourage the use of public transit, there are a lot of things that we need to do to improve the system. One of those things is making sure that bus shelters and bus stops are convenient and accessible and inviting for people to use. So you can, after you leave today and start looking around at the public transit system, you'll start to understand potentially why so few people are currently using public transit. Bus shelters is just one of the reasons why. There are also, the B-line specifically does not run typical hours that you see with the Metro bus, for example. I know I've talked to Mike about that many times, and it's an ongoing concern that the B-line service is limited. And then also, buses are just stuck in traffic like any other car. And during rush hour specifically, their reliability diminishes a lot. So when you're waiting at a bus shelter, or at a bus stop I should say, and it's 90 degrees outside and you've been waiting for 20 minutes, and you find out that your bus is actually late and you have to wait another 20 minutes, that really turns you off to using public transit ever again. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Bus shelters is just one of those things. I had already talked about the pedestrian master plan. We already have an adopted plan. There's a lot of really good data in that plan that talks about common collision types, where pedestrians are getting hit, high injury corridors, and then very specific proposals or interventions to address those collision types. So whether it's putting more high visibility crosswalks, restricting left turns so that when a driver is turning left, a pedestrian is not crossing at the same time. These are things that can be fixed. We have the tools at our disposal. We have the data. We know what the common issues are, and we can address it. We just need to be able to invest and put dollars into that plan and make sure that it's implemented. And then the last thing I'll say, again, I'm gonna hammer it home. Low cost, high impact. An example of intersection treatment in South Glendale is at the Adams Square Mini Park. If you've been there recently, you've seen some intersection improvements at that location. That's an example of something that we could do at schools, for example, or near schools where we want to encourage kids to walk to school again the way I did growing up here in the 90s. Bollards, painted curb extensions, high visibility crosswalks. These are things that slow cars down, particularly at the intersection where most collisions occur, and can really make a dent, no pun intended, those collision stats that we're all so familiar with. We know anecdotally But it is rooted in fact. We do know, we do have the numbers. And I haven't said this yet here today, but in the state of California, of cities our size, we rank the worst when it comes to collisions involving elderly pedestrians. And I think about that again when I think about my in-laws that have to cross Glen Oaks Boulevard to get to Trader Joe's. I think about my mom who technically can walk to a grocery store but doesn't because she doesn't feel safe doing it. We need to be thinking about all our vulnerable populations, seniors, youth, everybody.
I'll just add, we've been waiting 4 years for staff to do their analysis. It's something I raised 4 years ago when I got elected, and they said, on the B-line specifically, they said, well, it's not in the cycle, and so the cycle's almost there. So then the cycle came, but we've been waiting for it. I will say that after waiting for them 3 years for it, I was very aggravated and upset when the last report came, because I had made comments about, when we talk about meeting communities where they're at, staff came back with, they had obviously hired a consultant that did the outreach, and the consultant had basically put together this program where they had gone on the bus and asked the riders what would get them to ride more and so forth, missing out on the populations that need it but are not using it. And so when we talk about meeting communities where they're at, I had said this, given as part of my direction, that became the council's direction to staff, was go to the elderly buildings and talk to the elderly and find out why they're not using it. Is it the route? What routes are they looking for? Is it the times? Whatever the information may be. And then when it comes to our educational institutions, we have a habit of working with the administration instead of working with the students. And so my call was, go to your other big base is USD and GCC, but don't do it through the admin, do it through the different clubs and talk to students directly about why they're not using the bus. I have a bus right next to I went to River High School. I used to take that bus down to San Fernando to go volunteer on campaigns with. I was 15, 16 years old. I know that, if the right transportation is there, we would use it. There's one right by my house now. I have never taken that because it would be faster for me to walk down to Brand where I need to get to versus taking that bus. And so again, it's not a matter of just having it. I get frustrated. Sometimes I talk about the Metro Micro program and looking at maybe we don't need full-size buses, what we need are something smaller that aren't creating traffic, but we have more routes that are available. But the way that it works now, it's not where it needs to be. And if we build the right people, we'll use it.
Thank you for your response. My answer was just to pass it to Al. But I was just thinking of two things as you were talking. I mean, one, in general, I think, the problem with transit is you need the ridership to be able to expand the service, but if you don't expand the service, you might not get the ridership. It's a chicken and egg, and how do you kind of stimulate that? One thing, getting back to GUSD, is I've been frustrated because GUSD has not been willing to adopt something called Go Pass, which is a metro program that is heavily subsidized, and it makes transit free for students. And it's not just free for Glendale, it's free for them riding anywhere in LA County, as far as I know. So, and every school district around us, Burbank is part of it. Thank you, Burbank. And Pasadena, Los Angeles, I don't know. I think pretty much every school district is participating in it. GCC participates in it. The cost is a little higher for GCC because obviously their population is more likely to take the bus than students. It's probably more going to be just the high school students that do it. But I think something like that could kind of stimulate a little bit of demand and get more ridership, and then maybe it creates more of a there's more of a case for us The other thing I'll say is that I'm really interested in looking into micro transit services. You mentioned the Metro Micro, and many cities, if you've gone to Long Beach or Santa Monica, a lot of places have this thing called Circuit, which is like, it looks like a double-sized golf cart. It's electric, and it works within a zone. You call it on your phone. It's kind of like an Uber or Lyft. It comes in, it'll pick you up anywhere in that zone and drop you off anywhere in that zone for a nominal charge, maybe $1, $1.50 or something like that. I've asked, and Whittier just put it in, and a lot of cities are doing this, so it's something I really want us to do. Obviously, it's all about how much we're going to subsidize it. A lot of cities will allow advertising on it, which covers part of the cost, but then we're going to have to look for grants and things like that to help pay for it. And another interesting one, somebody just told me, is that there's some cities that have tried this with Uber and Lyft, where they kind of make a deal with them, so that if they pick you up and drop you off within the boundaries of Glendale, then it's like $1 or something like that. I want to look into some of this stuff, because there are a lot of neighborhoods which are never going to pay the cost, right? And how do they get access to these services?
Thank you for those responses, council candidates. Wow, we have frequency, transit stops, microtransit, mobility. We are now all urban planners. Well, that wraps up our main questions. I would like to now give about 2 minutes for each council candidate to do closing remarks. But before I do want to mention that the municipal elections in the city of Glendale are on June 2nd, and you should be getting ballots right about now. With that, I'll pass it on to any of the council candidates who would like to make the closing remarks.
Well, you've heard so much. There's a lot to talk about. We get into policy details. There's, it's fun stuff. There's a lot to say. Anyway, I'll just say that we have a dream team right here. You're looking at it. It's really important we consolidate the vote around the three of us and encourage everybody to do that, because we really can't leave an opening for a bad actor to get on council. It's kind of not quite like what's happening with the governor's race, but it has some similarity in that when you have a lot of people running, it's possible for somebody to get on with a relatively small number of votes. So really, it's important that everybody, I'm sure everybody here will be voting, but make sure everybody votes for the three of us. And we have this little slip of paper, the Progressive Circle, I guess originally created it. I know my campaign modified it. We've been using various forms of it, but it's a little cheat sheet that has, there it is, back there. You have like all the races. It's not just the council races, but it's clerk, it's treasurer, it's the school board races, the college board races, and it's all on a nifty little cheat sheet. Give it to all your friends. Take a scan of it and text it to everybody you know. We really need to consolidate. That's going to be critical. I'll just say thank you guys for doing this. This is like an amazing thing. It's never happened before, but it can't stop here, right? This has got to be the first step in really thinking about how we start to organize elements of the community to be political participants, right? We want to represent the whole community, right? We're not saying we don't want to represent other communities. We just want to represent Redmond. No, not at all. But we hear from some members of the community more, and we really should be hearing from everybody equally.
Well, I don't have to do what I usually do at council meetings, but I talk about this all the time. I'm very visual, so especially when we have a full council chamber, I keep half of the room, and then the other half of the room, I replace the faces of people that are sitting there with people that would never show up to a council meeting. That includes working families, that includes students, that includes people with language barriers, and in the front row are young girls, because for me, it's also important how I take up that space for women and girls that may be watching that meeting, and what kind of an example we're setting as a city for the next generation. And so I'm kind of glad I don't have to do that today here, but I want to say thank you I think it is historic for us to be here. And it's very unfortunate to see that that is the case. Well, I think that I'm going to correct myself. It is not the first one. It is not the first one in South Glendale. There were candidate forums at the Glendale Youth Center year after year that always had a packed hall. And so but I'm glad that this is happening, and I actually really appreciate the diversity of questions that were asked. And I think in one of the forums, there was so much heaviness in the responses from the other candidates, some of it calling it an existential crisis that's happening for our city and so forth. And while I had a closing remark prepared for that forum, I actually decided that I'm just going to put that aside and say how lucky are we to be living in a city like Glendale, where I get to walk at 3 in the morning with my dog and feel safe, where neighbors actually respect each other. There's something, do we have a lot of work to do in our city? Absolutely. But you go across the city lines, homelessness is a different issue. It's all because we take proactive measures. So we have a lot of work to do, and this election is going to be critical, and I hope to earn one of your 3 votes. Thank you.
I'm also very grateful for the opportunity. I've said at previous forums that you're not going to learn much from hearing sound bites from candidates, and this was different. We had the opportunity to expand on some ideas, to answer some critical questions, and to do that in depth. So I appreciate the opportunity for being able to do that. And I also thank the folks who decided not to come because it was We're trying to elaborate on our ideas, on our proposals, and how we think we can effectively lead this city. I also said at the last forum that I think the temperature in the room and the lack of civility has gone to extreme heights in our community. And I think it's incumbent on our leaders and people who want to be leaders in our city to bring that rhetoric down and not elevate it. So I'm hoping to bring some calm to City Council. I've heard people say, make City Council meetings boring again, because it has become so dramatic, so divisive. There's shouting matches. I really meant what I said earlier. I would love to see kids and youth involved in our civics, and perhaps they can be an example for the folks who have been such bad examples of how to be adults in the room. So I hope that this election is one that allows us to turn the page. I'm very excited for the opportunity to serve as a city council member and to earn your support. The last thing I'll say is that I hope each and every one of you get involved in some way, because historically, as has happened in previous cycles, I anticipate will happen again, we will win or lose by 50 votes. So it's very important that you get involved. The number of people in this room will determine the outcome of the election. And you voting is really important, but it's also more important and would be so meaningful to, if not me, the candidate that you decide to support, that you get involved in any which way you feel you're able to do. So you're welcome to talk with us afterwards, and thank you for being here today.
Clear we have 3 trailblazers on the dais right now. I just want to go ahead and mention one of them. We have Dan Roman, Ella Sautrin, Alec with a K, or Joseph. Thank you for GUSC parents. Thank you for the left for sponsoring this event. Thank you folks for watching at home, and for those of you who are in person, let's get the vote out. All right, let's make one. Thank you.